I am a 44-year-old man, let's call me Bradley for the sake of context, and I recently went through something that I need to share. I believe this forum is the right place since you often provide honest and constructive feedback. I don't want to delve into any environmental details. Instead, I want to focus on the facts and the sequence of events, much like people often do in discussion threads. My hope is that you can read my story and perhaps offer advice, or at least confirm whether I acted rightly or wrongly. The whole story is rather lengthy, so consider this your fair warning. I'll try to write everything in one go without embellishing or distorting anything. All right, here it comes. As mentioned, I'm 44 years old and lead a large company with 500 employees. We manufacture sheet metal components for industries, primarily in the aerospace and automotive sectors. The company is doing exceptionally well. We have several major, globally renowned clients, and in recent years we've secured so many new contracts that our revenue has been steadily increasing. Financially, I'm in a position where I barely need to worry about anything. Everything runs smoothly. Over the years, I've earned a good reputation as a business leader, someone serious and meticulous. I also have an engineering background, which perhaps explains why I rarely jump into risky ventures without careful analysis. I'm not the flirty type, nor someone who dives headfirst into whirlwind romances. My personal life has always taken a back seat to my career, at least until a few years ago. About 3 years ago, I met a woman at work. Let's call her Haley. She was 26 years old, but already very professional in how she handled things. I remember the first time I truly noticed her. It was during a discussion about booking conference rooms and planning a major board meeting. She worked as a secretary for another senior executive at the company, which meant she attended several internal meetings. I often saw her in passing while heading to or from meeting rooms, but I never thought of her as anything more than a colleague and acquaintance. That changed one day when we ended up chatting in the break room. I'll admit that I was immediately fascinated by Haley once we truly started talking. She was funny, beautiful, intelligent, and spontaneous. I quickly realized she also had a soft and empathetic side that I really appreciated. Our first extended conversation was so incredibly engaging. It was different from what I was used to. I don't usually fall for someone quickly, but something clicked inside me. At that moment, I thought, I want to get to know her better. But as I mentioned, I was 44 years old. She was 26. I felt the age gap was too significant, and I'm not the kind of person who casually suggests dinners or dates. We worked together in some capacity for about a year and a half, almost every day. She was often in my vicinity since we frequently had overlapping meetings and assignments. Over time, I realized I was more than just interested in her. We saw each other in hallways, occasionally grabbed a quick coffee, and attended larger staff meetings and events. During this period, my feelings for her grew stronger. However, I'm not someone who flirts openly or makes advances at work. That's not my style. I believe that a relationship should mature naturally if it's meant to be lasting. Still, I was convinced she understood that I truly liked her, at least on a level beyond mere collegiality. I also think she sensed that I held back because of the age difference in my role as a boss. Then, one Friday evening about a year and a half ago, we had a company after-work event. It got late, the music was playing, people were dancing, and I stayed in the background with a glass of water. I was tired after a long work week, but pleasantly surprised by how fun it was to see colleagues in a relaxed setting. Haley ended up next to me and we chatted a bit. The atmosphere was truly special. She said something funny, I laughed, and accidentally blurted out, "I really like you, you know that, right?" It wasn't planned, it just slipped out. She smiled broadly, leaned in, and gave me a light kiss on the lips. That was all that happened that evening. We went home separately and nothing more was said at the time. But that brief kiss changed everything. It was confirmation that the attraction wasn't just one-sided. After that night, we started communicating more outside of work hours. It began with innocent text messages, then longer phone calls in the evenings. We talked about our interests and future plans. Eventually, I mustered the courage to ask her out on a date. I invited her to dinner, and she said yes. That marked the beginning of an absolutely wonderful period. We connected in so many ways. We went to the theater, museums, and movies, and we traveled together whenever we got the chance. I can honestly say it was the most fun I've ever had in my life. There's no point in hiding the fact that the sex was beyond anything I'd ever experienced. I'd easily rate it an 11 out of 10. Her physical approach to me was different from anything I'd known before. There was a spark, an intensity, yet also a mutuality. I fell head over heels. I remember thinking after just a few months as we lay in bed one Saturday morning, I want to marry this woman and have children with her. I knew the age difference was against us, but I didn't care anymore. It felt like anything was possible. We continued our relationship in the same spirit: joy, passion, and a sense that life was simple. Eventually, Haley left her job at the company. It was a mutual decision, mostly because it felt inappropriate for her to remain at the company I led, but also because she wasn't entirely happy in her secretary role. I had no issue supporting her while she explored new directions in life. My assets were more than sufficient for both of us to live comfortably. One day, we decided to buy a duplex apartment together, spanning 350 square meters, about 3,767 square feet. It was an enormous home with 2 levels and plenty of space for home offices and social gatherings. Haley and I felt it was the natural step in creating a shared life together. I was utterly convinced I had found the love of my life and that we would be happy for many years to come. The only thing that slightly worried me was her youth, but she seemed genuinely interested in the same future dreams as me. However, a couple of years into the relationship, I started noticing things that didn't sit right. It was hard to pinpoint exactly what, but Haley was acting differently. She was no longer as affectionate, and our sexual relationship became much less frequent. No. It used to be the two of us planning weekends and trips, but now she seemed to prefer doing things on her own, or locking herself away to talk on the phone. She also started becoming secretive, locking her phone more often, placing it face down, and generally being on edge whenever a message popped up. She came and went at odd hours, usually offering vague excuses like, "I met up with an old friend," or "I went to an extra gym session." Rarely were there any specific details, and she distanced herself from me more than before. She had stopped working long ago, and I never saw any signs of other significant projects in her life. At the same time, the money was flowing out. I was paying for everything. Her clothing expenses ranged from $3,000 to $5,000 a month. On top of that, there was a car, a membership at an exclusive gym, spa treatments, massages, and a slew of other luxurious beauty services. Financially, this wasn't an issue. I earned more than we could spend, so I had no objections in that regard. But it was her distant behavior that worried me. I asked her outright if something was going on that caused her to act differently. At first, she said she was having issues with a friend, and it was draining her energy. Another time, she blamed it on being tired and not feeling up to her usual self. On another occasion, she claimed she had lost motivation for most things and was feeling down. It was hard for me to question that. I didn't want to push her if she was struggling with some form of depression. I still suggested she try going to the gym more often to clear her mind. She said it might be a good idea, but practically nothing changed. She continued to be cold, distant, and we hardly had any intimacy anymore. I felt rejected but didn't know how to handle it. I don't mind if someone needs a break or is dealing with personal issues, but her attitude and secrecy felt alarming. A few months passed, and the situation only worsened. She would disappear for an entire day without saying where she was going. When she came back, she was usually quiet and somewhat distracted. My trust in her began to erode. I had a growing pit in my stomach. One evening, I decided, no matter how morally wrong it might be, to check her phone. Since I had purchased it and all the subscriptions were in my name, I had access to certain accounts and passwords. It wasn't entirely ethical, but I felt I needed to know. Eventually, I found some messages from a man. Let's call him Mike. They were quite intimate and revealing. She wrote about missing him, longing to see him again, and wishing she could stay with him all night. There was no doubt in my mind that they had a relationship far beyond friendship. Reading those messages felt like my world was collapsing. I could almost hear my own heart pounding and feel my breathing quicken. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I threw the phone aside, went out onto the balcony, and tried to collect myself. Was she cheating? Was this real? I tried to find some logical explanation but kept returning to the same conclusion. She was having an affair with Mike. That explained her new behavior, her absences, her secrecy, and perhaps even her loss of interest in me lately. I strongly considered confronting her immediately, but I wasn't entirely sure how to handle it. After all, we weren't married. But we lived together, and everything she had I had bought for her. The car, the phone, all the insurance policies, gym memberships, spa treatments. It was all in my name. I didn't know whether to kick her out, confront her directly, or stay silent for a while to avoid making any rash decisions. The next day, I checked her computer but found nothing there. She was probably smart enough not to leave any traces on a device I also had access to. I went to the office but couldn't concentrate at all. Eventually, I called a private investigator I happened to know, a woman named Carmen. I had met Carmen at an event where my company had invited its clients. She wasn't actually one of our clients, but worked at the time for another guest at the event and seemed to be some kind of resource for investigations. She later told me she specialized in uncovering various types of fraud, industrial espionage, and infidelity cases. We had chatted casually at the event and exchanged business cards, mostly as a joke. I never expected I'd actually need to hire a private investigator. I called her, briefly explained everything, and she was incredibly professional. She said the best course of action would be to observe Haley for a few days to see what she was really up to when she wasn't at home. I told her Haley currently had no fixed work schedule or regular routines, but often went to the gym a few days a week. Carmen suggested she could park near our apartment and simply see where Haley went when she left. I agreed, even though it felt strange to hire someone to spy on my own girlfriend. But I must admit, I was desperate for answers. Carmen went to our building and waited in her car for hours, several days in a row. Sometimes she discreetly followed Haley from a distance. Then she called me with updates. I remember sitting in my office as Carmen reported. She mostly meets friends, goes shopping, or visits the gym. I overheard parts of a few conversations she had with a friend. Nothing negative about you, which is actually a good sign. Carmen also mentioned that Haley was definitely meeting someone, but she didn't yet know who. She only had the name Mike from something Haley had mentioned in a phone call. Carmen needed more evidence to determine exactly who he was. After a few more days of surveillance, Carmen and I agreed to install a small GPS tracker in Haley's car. This way, Carmen wouldn't have to follow her constantly and risk being discovered. Instead, she could wait for the right moment when Haley was likely meeting Mike. The first suspicious night occurred when I happened to work late at the office and didn't come home until much later. Haley left the apartment around 8 p.m. Carmen received a signal from the GPS tracker indicating the car was moving and began following her. The car drove to a residential area outside the city center. A nice place, but not overly luxurious. Carmen kept her distance and saw Haley park and walk up to a house. She went inside. Carmen found out who owned the house, and it turned out to be a man named Mike, with a last name I'd never heard before. Carmen managed to Google some information about him. Apparently, he was an old classmate of Haley's from high school. Carmen decided to sneak closer and see if she could observe anything through a window. She saw them embracing. She saw them kissing, and took a few photos to document it for me. Then she pulled back and waited in her car. After about an hour, Haley came out again and drove home. Carmen called me the next morning to report everything. I felt utterly numb. I thought I had already suspected what was happening, but having it confirmed so concretely was still a heavy blow. I broke down at the office. I'm not someone who cries often, but at that moment I couldn't hold it back. I didn't go home that night but stayed in a guest room at work, which isn't unusual for me, but this time for entirely different reasons. That night, while I was away, Haley sent several messages asking where I was. I replied that I had an unexpected workload and would be home the next day. I had a knot in my stomach because I knew I had to confront her. When I finally got home the next evening, after spending an entire day mustering the courage, I brought up the issue directly. I chose to be straightforward and not beat around the bush. I know you're cheating. Haley initially denied it, trying to look surprised and claiming I must have misunderstood something. That's when I showed her the photos Carmen had taken. I didn't show her everything, but I revealed enough for her to understand I had concrete evidence. Suddenly, she broke down. She started crying and apologizing in a way that felt, I don't know, more panicked than sincere. I asked the usual questions. Why? How long has this been going on? Have you brought him here? She admitted they'd been having an affair for several months. She said she really liked me as a person, but that she was in love with Mike. According to her, she hadn't brought him to our apartment. They'd only met at his house or out in public, but never here. I don't know if that's true. Still, when she said she was in love with Mike, it felt like someone had stabbed me in the gut. It was the worst feeling. My whole body screamed with anger, frustration, and sorrow. Yet I sat there, relatively calm on the outside. I tried to maintain some dignity. She dropped to her knees in front of me and said she didn't want to lose the comfortable lifestyle she had, that she loved me in her own way, but her heart was pulling her toward Mike. It was such a contradictory explanation, and I just felt empty. I told her I couldn't continue living with her under those circumstances. I said she had to move out. That's when she shifted tactics entirely. She proposed that I could buy her presence. If I agreed to pay her $10,000 a month, she'd stay in the apartment, or at least make herself available to me for intimacy or companionship whenever I wanted. She explained that I wouldn't suffer financially and that, this way, she could also continue her other life with Mike without giving up the money she had grown accustomed to. Essentially, she put into words a sort of sugar daddy arrangement where I'd be her primary sponsor while she maintained a romantic relationship with Mike. I felt sick. I'm not the kind of person who buys a woman's affection, not for a single minute. I told her that either she was with me because she loved me, or she wasn't with me at all. I was firm on this point. After all, I had already been betrayed, and the idea of acting as some sort of ATM and occasional partner was deeply humiliating. Haley begged and pleaded. She said I didn't need to know when she saw Mike, that she could keep it discreet, and that we could return to our old happy life if I just allowed her the freedom she needed. I refused. I had made up my mind this was non-negotiable. I told her to leave. She almost lost it, screaming that I was cold and heartless for not understanding how difficult it was for her to choose. But I stood my ground. In the end, she left the apartment. It's been a month now. I haven't seen her in the apartment, of course. She still sends me messages now and then, some apologetic, others vaguely threatening or manipulative. She tries to play on my guilt, implying that I've ruined her life, that I elevated her to a level she can't maintain on her own, and that I owe her some form of financial support. But I don't respond. I've blocked her number, though sometimes messages come from new numbers. To my knowledge, she doesn't have much legal ground to stand on. Mostly, I'm just sad because honestly, I miss her. I miss the Haley I thought she was. I sometimes wonder if I should have forgiven her or if we could have talked things through and saved the relationship. But then I remember her suggestion that I pay her so she could live a double life, and it makes me sick. No, it would never have worked. Some friends say I did the right thing, while others suggest that love can take different forms and that maybe I could have been more forgiving. Personally, I'm quite sure I'm not capable of being in a relationship where I know she's in love with someone else. I wasn't willing to accept such an arrangement, especially not with someone who, in the end, seemed more interested in my wallet than in me. Yet it hurts every time I come home and see our enormous apartment. It's filled with memories of us, how we used to wake up together. I think back to all the trips, theater visits, museum outings, our amazing intimacy, and wonder where it all went wrong. I know people say the age difference is always a risk, that she was too young, but I still want to believe it was genuine in the beginning. Unfortunately, I can never truly know if she was using me from the start. So now I wonder, do you think I did the right thing? Should I have given her a chance to repair the relationship, even though she was in love with Mike and wanted to keep seeing him? Should I have agreed to pay her, just so I could at least keep a part of her in my life? Or was it, as I believe, completely impossible to save? I feel torn between my sense of having been used and my grief over losing a woman I loved deeply, despite everything. I sincerely hope you can share your thoughts. I need to hear an outsider's perspective, because despite being a successful CEO with 500 employees, I'm just a regular person on the inside, someone who can have their heart broken. Thank you for taking the time to read my lengthy story. I know it turned into a full novel here, but I felt I needed to include all the details for you to understand my situation. I would truly appreciate your opinions and experiences. Did I do the right thing, or should I have handled it differently?
If you liked this story, please subscribe and give us a thumbs up. It helps a lot, and you won't miss out on any future stories. Take care and live your best life.